April 17, 1963, 11:42 p.m. The desk drawer was already open when he entered, and the paper inside was waiting like it had chosen him. The office did not announce itself. It sat above the street like it had learned how to listen. The walls were old but clean. The light came from a single lamp that did not flicker. Outside, traffic passed without hurry, its sound pressed flat by thick glass. Inside, nothing rushed, nothing needed to. Bumpy Johnson sat behind the desk as if it had been waiting for him all along. Not leaning, not stiff, just present. His hands rested where they always did, palms down, fingers relaxed, as if the wood itself knew them. The drawer on the right side of the desk was closed. For now. The man from the city stood near the door longer than necessary. He had a thin coat and a folder tucked tight under his arm. He looked around, measuring the room the way men do when they believe space might betray intention. Bumpy did not help him. "You can sit," Bumpy said finally. The chair across from the desk was straight-backed and solid. It did not creak when the man sat down. That disappointed him, though he did not know why. He placed the folder on his lap instead of the desk, a small decision, a careful one. "I won't take much of your time," the man said. Bumpy nodded once. Time was not something he ever gave away. The man cleared his throat. "This is routine, a review, nothing formal." Bumpy looked at him without interest, not cold, just accurate. Routine men always said that. The man opened his folder and began speaking in the language he trusted most. Addresses, dates, line items, words that sounded official because they were meant to remove responsibility from the person saying them. Bumpy let him talk. Silence did not mean approval, it meant space, and space made people fill it with themselves. As the man spoke, Bumpy reached down and opened the drawer. Not all the way, just enough. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, typed, crisp, folded once clean down the middle, a receipt. Nothing dramatic about it. No stains, no handwriting, just numbers aligned properly and a header that looked like it belonged in any office in the city. Bumpy did not touch it. He closed the drawer again. The sound was soft, but it changed the room. The man noticed. His voice stumbled for half a second before recovering. "Yes, so this line here," he said, pointing at a page in his folder. "It doesn't match the earlier filing." Bumpy waited until the man finished the sentence. "Things change," Bumpy said. He did not explain what kind. The man nodded quickly. "Of course, that's what the paperwork is for." Bumpy looked at him then, not sharply, not kindly, just long enough for the man to feel seen and not understood. Paperwork was not for change. It was for decisions already made. The man shifted in his chair. He placed his folder on the desk now, aligning it carefully with the edge. Another small decision, another correction. Bumpy watched it happen. By morning, this would be done. The man did not know that yet, but his body already did. It leaned forward now, attentive, ready. He was inside the room fully. Bumpy reached for the drawer again. This time, he opened it all the way. The receipt waited where it had been placed, calm as everything else in the room. Bumpy slid it onto the desk and left it there. Not as an offer. Not as a threat. As a fact. The man stopped speaking. He stared at the paper without touching it, as if it might speak first. It didn't. Nothing in that office ever did. The man did not reach for the receipt. He stared at it as if reading were an act that could not be taken back. His fingers stayed on the edge of his folder, pressing down slightly, as though anchoring himself to procedure. Bumpy waited. Silence, when it is owned, becomes instruction. "That isn't listed in the packet I received," the man said. His voice was careful now, not defensive, not curious. Careful was better. Bumpy nodded once. It wouldn't be. The man swallowed. He looked at the header. Then the numbers, they were clean, too clean to argue with. They sat where numbers were supposed to sit. Nothing spilled. Nothing crowded the margins. "It looks complete," the man said, surprised by his own words. Bumpy did not respond. The man reached forward and lifted the receipt. He held it with 2 fingers like something that could smudge. He scanned it again, slower this time. There was no trick hiding in the ink, no mistake begging to be caught. That was the first problem. "Where did this originate?" the man asked. Bumpy leaned back slightly, not away, just enough to show the question had landed and stayed there. "It came through," Bumpy said. The man waited for more. When it didn't arrive, he nodded, as if that answer had been expected all along. He placed the receipt on top of his folder, not inside it, not yet. Another pause, another decision stretched thin. Outside, a horn sounded once and went quiet. The man exhaled. "If this is filed," he said, choosing each word, "it settles the discrepancy." Bumpy looked at the desk, at the receipt, then back at the man. "Then it settles it," he said. "No pressure, no push. Just permission." The man felt it. That was the part that stayed with him. He had expected resistance, bargaining, a warning. Instead, he had been handed responsibility like a coat already tailored to fit. He slid the receipt into his folder. The sound of paper meeting paper was final in a way he did not like. "I'll process this first thing," he said, "by morning." Bumpy nodded again. That was the internal deadline, now spoken aloud by someone else. Once named, it belonged to the room. The man stood. He hesitated, then offered his hand. Bumpy looked at it for a moment longer than necessary. Then he shook it, firm, brief, complete. No warmth, no rejection. At the door, the man stopped. "This won't cause any issues," he said. It was not a question. Bumpy met his eyes. It already didn't. The man left. The office returned to stillness without effort. Bumpy closed the drawer where the receipt had lived. The empty space inside it felt correct. He sat alone, listening to the city breathe. By morning, the paper would be where it belonged. And so would the weight that came with it. Morning did not arrive all at once. It crept in through windows and routines and habits that did not ask questions. The city building woke up the way it always did, lights buzzing on floor by floor, the smell of old paper warming as bodies filled the rooms. The man arrived early. He told himself it was efficiency. The truth was simpler. He had not slept well, and lying in bed had felt heavier than standing upright. He placed his coat on the back of his chair and sat without removing his folder. It rested on his desk like something borrowed. He did not open it right away. Across the room, a clerk laughed at something small. Someone poured coffee too fast and cursed it under their breath. The world was intact. That unsettled him. He opened the folder. The receipt sat where he had placed it, now mixed among forms and stamps and routing slips. It looked smaller here, less important. That was its strength. Important things attracted attention. This one did not want to be seen. He read it again. The numbers held. The formatting held. The date aligned cleanly with an entry already in the system. It did not argue with anything on record. It completed a shape that had been open just enough to notice. That was when he understood what the paper allowed. It allowed closure. He stood and walked to the filing counter, the receipt tucked inside the folder unseen. No one stopped him. No one needed to. He was not sneaking. He was performing a task that had been prepared for him. At the counter, he waited behind another man holding zoning requests. The delay felt longer than it was. He checked the clock. It was still early, before most people would ask their first question of the day. By morning, this ends. The thought did not feel like relief. It felt like obligation. When it was his turn, he slid the folder across. The clerk flipped through pages without expression, hands moving on instinct. Stamps fell where stamps always fell. Ink pressed down, then lifted. "Anything else?" the clerk asked. The man shook his head. The folder came back lighter. He returned to his desk and sat. He did not look around. He did not look back at the counter. He placed the folder in his drawer and closed it with more force than necessary. The sound echoed in his chest. All day the system absorbed the paper. It moved through offices the way water finds its level. Each step stripped it of context. Names became initials. Initials became codes. Codes became entries that no longer belonged to anyone. That was how things disappeared. By afternoon, he tried to remember the exact way Bumpy Johnson's office had smelled. He couldn't. He remembered the desk more clearly than the man, the calm of it, the certainty. The receipt did not feel like a mistake. That was the second problem. Near the end of the day, a supervisor paused at his desk. "That discrepancy from last quarter," she said. "It's resolved." "Yes," he replied. She nodded and moved on. No signature, no discussion. The system had accepted it. When he left the building, the light was already shifting. The city looked the same as it had the night before, but he walked slower now, as if the air had thickened. Somewhere across Harlem, a desk drawer sat empty. The space where the receipt had been was quiet. And the man understood without being told that quiet things lasted longer. The next morning arrived clean. No calls waited for him. No note sat on his chair. His name was spoken the way it always was, without wait, without pause. That should have been reassurance. Instead, it felt like confirmation. He sat at his desk and opened the drawer again. The folder was still there, thinner now, ordinary. He did not take it out. Across the room, files moved. Trays emptied and filled again. Paper crossed desks like it always had. The system did not hesitate. It never did. It accepted what fit and ignored what did not ask to be noticed. He told himself this was how order worked. Late in the morning, an auditor stopped by. Not for him, for the cabinet behind him. The auditor opened drawers, flipped through entries, nodded to herself. When she reached the relevant section, her hand paused for half a second. He felt it in his chest before she said anything. "This one's clean," she said, almost to herself. That was all. Clean meant finished. Clean meant closed. Clean meant no one would return to it unless forced. The auditor moved on. He did not follow her with his eyes. He kept them on his desk, on a coffee ring that had dried into the wood years ago. He traced its edge with his finger, slow, deliberate. He needed something solid to touch. By noon, the building felt warmer. Air thickened with bodies and time. He skipped lunch without noticing. Hunger felt distant, like something from another day. He thought of the office again, the way the chair had not creaked, the way silence had not asked permission. He realized then that he had not been convinced. He had been allowed. That difference stayed with him. In the afternoon, a call came from another department, a simple request, clarification on a matter unrelated. He answered without hesitation. His voice sounded normal. That surprised him. After the call, he sat back and waited for the feeling to change. It didn't. The weight had settled, not grown. By the end of the day, he understood something he had not before. Consequences did not always announce themselves. Sometimes they arranged the room so carefully that nothing seemed out of place afterward. He locked his drawer and stood. At home that night, he ate without tasting. He placed his keys on the same hook they had always hung from. He checked the lock twice, then a third time, annoyed with himself for doing so. Sleep came late. When it did, it brought no images, just the sense of being finished with something he could not name. The next week passed without interruption. Then the question started quietly. A missing signature here. An entry that no longer aligned there, nothing alarming, just enough to pull threads, just enough to notice absence. He answered what he could, he deferred what he couldn't. By the end of the month, his supervisor stopped using his name in conversation, not deliberately, just less often, as if it belonged to a smaller space now. One afternoon, he arrived to find his desk cleared. Not emptied, reassigned. His things sat in a box by the wall, pens, a framed photo, a mug with a chipped handle. No explanation waited. He stood there longer than necessary, holding the box, listening to the room continue without him. The system did not resist his removal. It had already adjusted. Later, when he walked past the building, he did not look up. Across Harlem, in an office that never changed its tone, Bumpy Johnson opened his desk drawer out of habit. The space inside remained empty. It stayed that way. And the man who had carried the paper understood, too late, that nothing had been taken from him. He had simply been placed where he belonged. The reassignment did not come with a meeting. It arrived the way small corrections always did, already decided, already logged. A new badge number, a temporary desk that did not face the windows, a supervisor who spoke politely and did not explain. The man accepted it without protest. Protest required belief that something had gone wrong. He no longer trusted that instinct. The new desk was narrower. The chair leaned slightly to the left. When he sat down, it made a sound, not loud, just enough to remind him that this place had not been chosen for him. It had been found. He placed the box beneath the desk and removed only what was necessary. A pen, a notepad, his ID. The mug stayed in the box, so did the photo. He did not decorate. That afternoon, he was given work that did not require decisions, transfers, verifications, cross-checks that ended where they began, the kind of tasks meant to occupy hands, not judgment. He completed them carefully. Careful was still a habit. At lunch, he stayed at his desk. He told himself it was to catch up. The truth was simpler. He did not want to be seen choosing a table. He did not want to test whether anyone would sit across from him. Across the room, conversations formed and dissolved. Names were spoken and repeated. None of them were his. He noticed, with a dull clarity, that he had become efficient in a way that did not leave a mark. That night he dreamed of drawers. Not the one at his new desk, another one, wider. He dreamed it opened smoothly and held nothing. He woke before understanding why that mattered. The following week, he was asked to train a junior clerk. The clerk was young and eager and careful in the way new people were. She took notes quickly and nodded often. She asked questions that had obvious answers because she wanted to be seen asking them. He showed her the system without commentary, where files went, how entries aligned, what to double-check, what not to touch unless told. "Why not?" she asked once. He paused. "Because some things are already finished," he said. She wrote that down, though it did not help her. As the days passed, his access narrowed, not officially, subtly. A password changed, a folder rerouted, a request handled by someone else without explanation. He adjusted without comment. That was the part he regretted later, not the filing, not the receipt. The adjustment. He had learned how to disappear without resistance. One morning, he arrived to find his name removed from an internal list. It had been replaced by a blank space, then a temporary code. He stared at it longer than necessary. Blank space was not accusation, it was completion. He thought then of the receipt again, not its content, its placement, how it had been offered without urgency, how it had waited. He understood something he had avoided before. The paper had not implicated him. It had introduced him to the part of the system that did not need faces. That afternoon, a man from internal review stopped by. He asked neutral questions, dates, processes, who handled what, when. The man answered truthfully. Truth, he had learned, was safest when it did not include meaning. The reviewer nodded and left. No conclusion was offered, none was required. By evening, his access badge failed once before working again. A glitch, he was told. He believed it. At home, he opened his mail and found nothing unexpected. Bills, notices, advertisements, life continuing with its usual insistence. He sat at the table and thought about the desk drawer again, about the space where something had been and how absence could be shaped. By morning, he knew he would not be returning to that building forever. Not because he was being removed, because he had already been finished. Somewhere else in the city, Bumpy Johnson walked into his office and closed the door behind him. He did not look at the desk right away. He never rushed the end of things. The call came on a Tuesday. Not early, not late, time to feel ordinary. He was asked to report to an office he had passed many times and never entered. No reason was given. No tone was used. The voice on the line did not sound concerned or curious. It sounded complete. He hung up and sat still for a moment. Then he stood and walked. The office was smaller than he expected. One desk, 2 chairs, a window that looked onto nothing important. The man from internal review was already there, seated, hands folded, posture relaxed. "Sit," the man said. He did. There were no accusations, no raised voices, no files slammed onto the desk. The questions came in a careful order, each one resting lightly on the last. He answered them all. Not defensively, not eagerly, just accurately. At one point, the reviewer asked, "Do you recall why you processed that particular filing personally?" The man paused. This was the question he had known would come. "It was part of my responsibility at the time," he said. The answer was true. It was also insufficient. The reviewer nodded and made a note. He did not look up when he said, "And you saw no issue with it?" "No," the man replied. That too was true. The meeting ended without a conclusion. He was told someone would follow up. He was thanked for his cooperation. When he returned to his desk, the temporary code on the list had been replaced with another name. Not his. He stood there longer than necessary, watching someone else settle into the rhythm he had once believed belonged to him. By the end of the week, his access badge stopped working entirely. This time, it was not a glitch. Human resources handled it efficiently. There was paperwork. There always was. A form to sign. A packet to review. A tone that suggested this was unfortunate but necessary. He signed where indicated. He asked no questions. On his last day, he cleared the box beneath his desk. The mug, the photo, the pens he no longer recognized as his. He left the notepad behind. It felt right to leave something unfinished. When he walked out of the building, no one stopped him. No one noticed. The doors closed with the same sound they always made. Outside, the city did not adjust. That night he sat alone and tried to explain what had happened to himself. Not in detail, just in shape. He could not find the beginning. The end had arrived too quietly. He thought again of the receipt. Not the numbers, not the header. The moment it had been placed on the desk. The way it had not demanded anything. He understood now that power had not been exercised against him. It had been demonstrated through him. He had been the final step, not the target. Weeks later, he passed the building once more and did look up this time. The windows reflected the sky without interruption. Inside, the system continued. Somewhere across Harlem, Bumpy Johnson opened his office door and sat behind his desk. The drawer remained empty. That was the proof. Not of removal. Of completion. The city did not mark his absence. Buses ran on time. Offices opened and closed. Men filled chairs that had never belonged to them in the first place. The building where he had worked adjusted the way buildings always did, by continuing. At first, he treated his days like a temporary pause. He woke early. He dressed as if expected. He kept his shoes polished. Habit tried to convince him that routine could call him back. It didn't. The calls never came. Weeks passed before he allowed himself to admit what had happened. Not that he had lost his job. That was easy. Jobs left people all the time. What unsettled him was that nothing had replaced it. No explanation followed. No warning reminded him to be careful next time. There was no next time. He walked Harlem more than he used to, not with purpose, with attention. He noticed things he had never needed to notice before. Storefronts that changed names without changing ownership. Men who stood in the same places each morning and never spoke. Power lived there too, it just didn't announce itself. One afternoon, he passed the building where Bumpy Johnson kept his office. He knew it without knowing how. There was nothing on the door that suggested importance. No sign, no guard. Just a quiet confidence in the way the street seemed to move around it instead of through it. He did not stop. He did not look up. That restraint felt learned. At home, he began sorting through his papers, old tax forms, letters, notes he had kept because throwing them away once felt irresponsible. He moved slowly, careful not to rush decisions he no longer needed to make. In the bottom of a drawer, he found a copy of a filing checklist, an old one, the kind used to train new clerks. He unfolded it and scanned the familiar steps. Verify alignment. Confirm source. File clean. He folded it again and placed it back. Clean did not mean safe. He knew that now. The nights were quiet, too quiet. He filled them with small noises, radio static, a ticking clock, anything that suggested the world was still counting time for him. Sleep came unevenly. When it did, it carried no dreams, just the sense of being observed by something that did not care whether he noticed. He began to understand that he had not been punished. Punishment required judgment. This had been resolution. That difference changed how he held himself, how he spoke to strangers, how he accepted small refusals without argument. He had learned deeply that resistance was not always met with force. Sometimes it was met with patience. One morning he received a letter from the city, not an appeal, not an inquiry, a notice of record correction. Something filed years earlier had been adjusted. The language was neutral, the effect was permanent. He stared at the page for a long time. The correction did not mention him. That was the final confirmation. The system had not blamed him, it had finished with him. Across the city, Bumpy Johnson sat at his desk and reviewed numbers that did not matter. Men came and went. Conversations happened. Decisions were made without urgency. He did not think about the receipt anymore. That was the point. The object had done what it needed to do. It had passed through hands that understood procedure and settled where it belonged. The empty drawer remained. Absence, when intentional, did not need guarding. By nightfall, the man who had filed the paper accepted something he had avoided since the beginning. His role had never been central. It had been precise, chosen not for loyalty or intelligence but for reliability. He had been trusted to do exactly what he did. That trust was the judgment. He folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside his bed. He did not lock it. He did not need to. Some consequences did not follow you. They stayed where they were placed. And waited. He stopped checking the mailbox every morning. That habit ended without decision. One day he realized his feet no longer turned toward the door at the sound of paper hitting metal. The absence of expectation felt heavier than disappointment ever had. He spent his time differently now, slowly, Not carefully. Carefully implied fear. This was something else. Acceptance without comfort. The drawer beside his bed became the only place he kept official things. The letter from the city stayed there, folded once, never reopened. He did not reread it. He did not need to. The words had already done their work. Sometimes, late at night, he imagined the receipt again. Remade it in his mind with different numbers, a different header, a small error he might have caught if he had been sharper, braver, less willing. Each version ended the same way: filed, accepted, finished. That was when he understood the argument he could never settle. Was it power that removed him, or his obedience to order? He had not been forced. He had not been threatened. He had been presented with something that fit the rules perfectly and asked to complete the shape. And he had done it. That question stayed with him. It followed him into conversations he did not finish and opportunities he did not pursue. It lived in the way he now paused before agreeing to anything that sounded reasonable. The world rewarded that pause less than it had rewarded his efficiency. He did not become bitter. Bitterness required blame. This was quieter. He became precise about what he touched and what he left alone. That precision narrowed his life, but it also clarified it. Across Harlem, the office remained. Men still came through the door. They still spoke first. They still believed they were there to verify something. Bumpy Johnson never changed the desk. The drawer stayed empty. That was the consequence. Not a body. Not a warning. An absence that proved something had once been there and no longer needed to be. Years later, when people spoke about power, they spoke loudly. Violence, fear, control. They did not speak about placement or timing or how a single piece of paper could move through a system and remove a man without anyone raising their voice. The man listened to those conversations and said nothing. Silence had taught him more than explanation ever could. And if someone asked him carefully what he would do differently, he never answered directly. He only asked them a question in return. If something clean and correct appears in front of you, do you ask who placed it there? Or do you file it and let the system decide who disappears?